Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Daily Defender. Glad to be with everybody again. Glad you guys are spending some time with us. Really appreciate to be back with you. Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay there in between the different videos, but again, great to be back with everybody. Also, again, as usual, a very, very warm welcome to all of our new subscribers. We've had another chunk of them, so really appreciate you guys coming on board. Welcome back to all of our current subscribers. Great to have you back. Still need everybody's help. It's nice we're closing in on kind of the 70% mark that we need, so we keep working towards our goal on the YouTube channel here. So please continue to subscribe and comment and like, share it among your networks, etc. Also, a really nice set of comments recently. Really appreciate that. As I always state, love interacting with you guys, so really appreciate, and it's been a great couple dialogues here recently, so really appreciate that. And that's another good lead into this, because there was a comment on the Model 39 video I had done, and that was the last video I've done or did. If you haven't seen that, please check it out. Really, really interesting firearm. It was a Model 39, a very, very early serial number, putting it probably right around the 1958 mark. But had the box and pretty much had some components, or was probably built with leftover components, if you will, on what would have essentially have been the pre-model 39, which Smith & Wesson would have just called the 9mm semi-automatic or semi-automatic pistol. And so that was really, really interesting. Like I said, if you haven't seen that, check it out. And that leads me to two other points. One, first, a PR message. I had the opportunity to go to the Hampton Roads Naval Museum. I think I have that right, in Virginia. And I'll try to post or embed some pictures here, because they have what I believe to be the only original on display hush puppy pistol in the U.S. And I have to assume the world, because I assume there's not another hush puppy pistol somewhere displayed in a museum. So I think it's the only hush puppy pistol on display in the U.S. It's a really cool museum. Actually, it's free to walk in. Some of the other components of the museum are not, but to just walk the museum, and it's a relatively short museum, but a small museum, but it has a real key component to the Vietnam War. And again, I think the hush puppy pistol is on loan from another museum, but it's very accessible. This is not one of these things where it's up 12 feet high and you can't get to it, or display case with a rope around and you're 6 or 8 feet away. You can literally walk right up to it in the display case. It's about at shoulder height. You can easily see it, walk about 2/3 of the way around. For me, it was just amazing. It was amazing to actually physically see a hush puppy pistol. And that's a great lead into this, because today we want to talk about a Model 59. And this is still connected to that, because, and I'll get into this in the deep dive, but effectively the hush puppy program for the U.S. Navy SEALs in Vietnam, and most likely probably also associated with the CIA, right? And even perhaps the Phoenix program. But, that's all the behind the scenes and the cover story or the front story, although completely true and realistic, is the pistol was produced for the U.S. Navy SEALs. But I think you could probably connect some dots there and understand what the CIA was trying to do in Vietnam and had been doing for many years. And then this, the Phoenix program and the pistol itself come to a completion, and the SEALs use it. But part of that program was a request by the SEALs for a double stack or larger capacity 9mm firearm. And that's how we get to a Model 59 from Smith & Wesson in the early 70s. So I think that's a good place to kind of complete the intro. And without further delay, let's get into the deep dive on this Model 59. So as I just mentioned in the intro, we want to take a much closer look, deep dive on this Model 59 that I have here. And it's another great and interesting firearm from Smith & Wesson that has a lot of interesting things that I think that we want to talk about, and I think you guys will find interesting. And as I alluded to in the intro, there is basically a direct connection to this firearm and the Model 39 but in conjunction with what the Seals were doing with the Model 39 and the Hush Puppy. And we'll get into that as well. And we'll do our deep dive, and we'll also get into some specs. I had a comment from one of you asking if I could make sure that we're kind of always talking about weights and dimensions and things like that. So we'll try to do that as well. So yeah, we've got a number of things to talk about here. Also, I didn't allude to this in the intro, but you will notice that we have some very interesting wear here on this firearm. And so I will explain, or what I believe happened there. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we kind of do the walk around. But we do have a clear and safe firearm. Obviously, all the firearms are checked before the video, but we'll do that. So everybody's comfortable and always safety checking, which is has to be always done, right? We always need to be doing that. So happy to do it. And so we've got a clear and safe firearm that we can work with. And as I stated, this is a Model 59. And I guess, again, historically, we should start with how and where does this pistol become part of the Smith & Wesson line. And probably one of the easiest ways I can do that is with this particular book. And this is a very, very interesting book, and it's by a gentleman by the name of Dwayne Sharon. And Dwayne Sharon is as it states, former director of research and development, essentially spent his entire career with Smith & Wesson. And so it's a fascinating book. There was also I guess what we'd call a podcast today, but there was an interview with him, and I don't remember, I remember listening to it a while ago, but I don't remember the year that it was, the interview actually took place, but that's also very interesting to hear him talk. But in particular, what we want to talk about today is this statement that he makes in this book to confirm that basically the Seals had wanted a larger capacity firearm than the 39 Hush Puppy that he had basically created. And he basically explains here in a few paragraphs that he decided to show a 14-round prototype to the Seals, of which several were made. The Seals did comment on some difficulty with the alloy-framed pistols, and he suggested that they make all the parts out of stainless steel, and in fact did fabricate 16 of those stainless steel pistols in June of 1969. And I did buy this book. It wasn't given to me or anything like that, so this is my copy, and I certainly want to reference the information correctly to Dwayne Sharon in this piece. It's an amazing book. I mean, again, if you have any interest in Smith & Wesson history, I suggest you pick one up. I don't know if this one is in print. I found it on an online source, and it was actually a signed copy, which was really cool, so I couldn't pass that up. And again, a great little piece of information and tidbit, how he explains that he creates this prototype, and effectively then it becomes the 59. So we fast forward to the actual model that the civilians, or that we all got, and it was introduced in the early 1970s, I believe 1971, as the Model 59. And that's what we have here. So that's its historical reference. Again, very interesting, very cool in my opinion. We all have a firearm that we can directly link back to what Smith & Wesson and the Seals wanted. And I think that's really, really cool. So, and also talk a little bit about this firearm in terms of what I like about it, anything I dislike, and I recently shot it, so I'll comment on that like I usually do. So I think that's our historical connection first. Second was the comment from a viewer that could we spend a little bit more time on specs, and so we'll do that as well. And we're going to use an official Smith & Wesson catalog. This is a 1980s version, and actually there's a price list as well, and I'll comment on that in a second. This is kind of an interesting catalog because we show the 59 right here, but we also show its replacement, the 459. So you can see this transition from the 59 into the 459 right in that 1980s. And in traditional Smith & Wesson fashion, things are not just done with a light switch. There is a gap and a space between outgoing models, new models, potentially even some hybrids or shared parts, etc., as they completely phase out the old model. But this is a good representation. Then we've got solid information here on this of the 59 from Smith & Wesson. And just very quickly, we'll rattle it off here. The barrel is a 4-inch barrel. Overall length is 7 7/16. Sight radius is 5 3/4, and it's a 27-ounce firearm. And it talks about that it's available in either blue or nickel, and that the stocks, which they still call them stocks here, or grip panels, were a checkered high-impact molded nylon. And so that's what we have here, a molded nylon. They've moved away from wood by the time you get to the 59 and the 459. And it's described as the Model 59 9mm 14-shot auto-loading pistol. And of course, it is in 9mm. So that, I hope, checks the spec box for people that want to know that information. If you are also interested, the firearm retailed in 1980 for, as a blued version, about $340. Which is also very interesting because you can't buy one for $340 today, right? They're all probably about double that, or even higher. I picked this one up for probably the mid-5s, and I'll talk about, most likely due to this frame where this was not a pristine example in original box. I do have the original box, and we'll talk about that. But I was in a shop today, actually, that had a 59 in an original box, and it's close to double, what the original price was in 1980. So, as a lot of things, Smith & Wesson, there's definitely an investment here. If you bought on the low side, we're all probably buying on the high side now. If you're trying to complete your collection or become fascinated with these firearms as I have, and still want to have this piece of history, so there's a price for that, but it is what it is. And so yeah, just another example here of where some of these firearms are, price wise in the market. So again, hopefully another data point for you all. I think probably the next step is probably just to do our traditional walk around like we usually do, and we can talk a little bit about the pistol and what we see and what we have. This particular model, let's cover that off again. These were built basically from the early 70s, like I said, 1971. To about 1980 or 81, if I remember correctly. Actually, 81, 82, I think. So it was early 80s. So even that catalog that we just looked at from 1980, that was getting close to the end of this production run. And of course, we saw the Model 459, its replacement, in the catalog as well. This particular version, based on serial number, I put in probably the 1977, 1978 range. So, probably a later version, right? Started in 71, ended in, let's call it 81, a decade of production. I did read somewhere that there were over 200,000 of these produced. I always struggle locating production numbers for Smith & Wesson. So rarely, do I have other references in terms of, how many 39s did they make or how many 5904s did they make? I always struggle locating production numbers, and I don't know why that is for Smith & Wesson. I can't imagine that's any master secret, but I did come across a figure, assuming it's correct, that over 200,000 of these were produced over its basically decade of production. So that's kind of interesting as well. But yeah, just doing the traditional walk around. We've already checked it's clear and safe, as we know. We have a steel slide with an aluminum frame. As it was stated in Sharon's book, the SEALs had some issues with the aluminum frames and wanted a completely stainless steel pistol, which is interesting because Smith & Wesson then does make those as third-generation firearms. But as we walk around this, and this is still considered a first-gen firearm, by the way. This is still a first-generation Smith & Wesson. The 39s and 59s are double-digit model numbers, right? 2 digits, and they are first-generation firearms. We move to the second generation firearms, and we have a 3-digit, like a 459 or a 639 or a 539 or something like that, minus the value series, which is part of the third generation, where they mysteriously decide to use 3-digit numbers again. But we've talked about that in another video. So this firearm, again, nice machine work on the slide like we normally and usually see with Smith & Wesson at this time. Smith & Wesson roll stamped here. the traditional 4-line information for Smith & Wesson as well. This is using a more current font, as you can see there. We'll try to get that in the camera, not like the old 39 that I showed you with a slightly older font. The front sight is still a fixed and serrated ramp, but it is part of the slide. And we still have this rather unique, I guess I'd almost call it aged rear sight, adjustable rear sight that the 39s and 59s used. All the first generation, well, there's only two, use this particular sight. We have rear serrations. We have a Decocker safety. This is, again, a traditional Smith & Wesson double action, single action setup with a Decocker, right? So we've talked about that in other videos. So you obviously would insert the magazine chamber around, and then you would be able to safely decock that and either carry it in the down safe version, or more likely in where I think how everybody else carried it or was normally carried, then with the safety in the up position. But of course, then you had a round chambered, and your first pull would be a double action pull, long drawn pull. The firearm would fire, and then you would be in the slide would cycle, and you would be in a single action mode with a very, very short, very traditional break. You'll notice that this, however, does not function because all of the Smith & Wesson semi-autos for this time frame, well, I should say first, second, and third generation, and we've talked about this in other videos, have a magazine disconnect safety. So the magazine has to be inserted in the firearm in order for the trigger to actually function. Of course, as we've safety checked it, we're comfortable with that, and you can see there's just a little bit of take up and a very, very nice break. So traditional double action, single action for Smith & Wesson, very traditional feel for the double action, very traditional feel for the single action with the very short reset and a very crisp trigger pull for single action. We do still have a barrel bushing. It is the what I call the 3/4 type. You may have noticed, and I think I pointed out on the model 39, the very early 39 had a full barrel bushing, more like a 1911. This has, I guess, a 3/4 or 80 or 90% style there. Interesting, that they're still using that. Of course, they move away from this in their second gen and third gen guns. Kind of working down onto the frame, I found this a little interesting. The serial number and model number are over here, lined up more with the Smith & Wesson branding here. Normally, it's found closer down to the trigger. I don't know why it was up here. I found that kind of interesting. We already talked about the grip panels in the when we were reviewing the catalog, so we've commented on that. You have front serrations here and this very, very, very nice high gloss bluing that Smith & Wesson was using. And I guess we now should talk about this very interesting wear. So if you kind of look at this wear, and the shop owner did not know what this was either. I at first thought maybe it was some funny reholstering, constant reholstering, but it really doesn't seem to match that. I think what has happened here is there were lasers specifically. I think flashlights as well, but certainly lasers for these Smith & Wessons that would have attached right in this area. And I have to assume that someone had that. Maybe it just wore, or there was constant wiggle on it, or what have you. But it's basically worn down the bluing to the bare aluminum, where you can see that. And of course, this is aluminum, so it's not really going to rust. It's very smooth. There's no gouging or pitting or anything like that. And the rest of the pistol is basically pristine, right? When we'll do the complete walk around, you'll see that. So I have to assume that one of these very old style, I think they were kind of a clamp style with a couple screws, was on here and just unfortunately rubbed it raw. But that's interesting. I would love to know the history on who was using this and why they felt the need to have a flashlight or a laser that wasn't overly common, right, in the 70s and 80s. So could have some really interesting history, but I don't think we'll ever be able to sort that. And so we're just kind of walking around. There is a rear serrations on the back. And this is a panel, by the way. This really is three components. You have two grip panels, and then you have the rear portion here, which also comes off or down. Obviously, you just have to push the pin out, and then you can remove the rear portion. On this side, we have Pat pending, and we have a very nice trademark stamp, and of course our continued wear pattern up on this side of the frame as well. Traditional or most current extractor here, not the dog leg extractor, not the very wide extractor that we saw in the original 39. This was basically the final version extractor that Smith & Wesson went to on their semi-auto pistols, referring to the first, second, and third gen. There is not a ambi safety decocker, so there's only one at this point. And what else do we have on this side? I think that kind of rounds it out. Obviously serrations here, of course, and again, very nice machining. You'll also notice that this matte finish on the top to reduce glare is a nice touch, and you see that all on all the Smith & Wesson semi-autos at this point. We have a rounded trigger guard, which is nice. I think that kind of keeps to the original styling. I'm not a huge fan of the square, although it doesn't particularly bother me. What else do we have here? We do have a lanyard loop. So Smith & Wesson is still, again, first generation, right? So there's still a lot of thinking and thought around military applications and things like that, maybe even contracts that they wanted to go for and all that kind of stuff. You've got a pretty nice beaver tail here, by the way. And at 27 ounces, honestly, it feels a little heavier than that. I'm not sure what it is. It's probably the internal components and the steel slide. I've almost would have expected a aluminum frame gun to feel a little bit lighter. They tend to be, there can be very lightweight, but this one definitely has some weight to it, especially through here. So I assume there's a lot of steel components used inside the firearm. Obviously, we have a full hammer that's serrated, so nothing like a recessed hammer or anything like that. Magazines are, as stated, double stack 9mm, 14 round metal mag, very, very, reminiscent of what Smith & Wesson was building then. Again, classic Smith & Wesson 9mm stamped on the floor plate. That's the older Smith & Wesson sign that they continue to use with floor plates for quite some time. I always found that kind of interesting. Not sure why the old font is continued to use on floor plates longer than on the firearm themselves. But plastic follower, but very well made, functions completely fine. And it's a flush. You probably noticed that. Nothing really from a beveled magwell or anything like that. It's pretty square, pretty basic, although fairly wide mouth. It is a flush fit on this particular one, although you do have a bit of a bevel or a little notch, I should say, that you could, if you were having trouble getting the magazine out, you've got a little bit of room there to kind of work the magazine or work the pistol. And yeah, I think that kind of rounds out kind of the walk around and the deep dive. It was very, very nice to shoot. I shot it yesterday, and I'll bring the box here over in a second. Very, very nice, very accurate, 7 to 10 yard range. Everything was in the A zone. I found the trigger on this particular 59 to be very good, very traditional, very recognizable to me. Really enjoyed it. It is a little thick. I just wanted to kind of mention that. I mean, this is definitely a thicker, wider pistol than the 39. I know some other people will comment on that from time to time, that they like the thin feel of the 39. And Smith & Wesson did continue with single stack semi-automatics through their second generation and even into their third generation. They built the 3904 for 2 years, I believe it was, and that was still a full-sized frame, single stack, 8-round, firearm that they, even for 2 years, even in the third generation. So obviously, I think that lost its appeal. Everybody wanted more capacity, but I think from a grip feel, there are certainly some fans, myself included, of the single stack. Although this is still very comfortable. I have a relatively small hand, as I've talked about before. This does feel a little chunky, a little blocky, a little thick, but still very comfortable for me. The undercut is here, and I think it's the beaver tail, but it just fits very, very well in my hand. I don't feel uncomfortable with it at all. So shooting it was an absolute pleasure. I actually had a Browning high power that I shot next to it, and I actually enjoyed this a little bit more. So for whatever that's worth. And yeah, let's just bring out the box real quick, and we'll just, so it's always, as I've stated before, it's always a treat to get a firearm with the original box. I guess real collectors are doing that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of boxes for sale on the internet, which is good and bad. That always kind of tells me that it didn't follow the firearm. But then if you're trying to get to a box of the model number and vintage, obviously your serial number won't match, but to at least get a collectible box with your firearm, at least they're out there. So again, for whatever that's worth, but traditional Smith & Wesson labeling, model 59 there. And there's always a mixture of, what you get. I think over the years, things get misplaced and lost. Obviously, we've got traditional, rust inhibitor wax paper there. This looks like standard tissue paper. And then in this particular box, and I haven't added anything, this is what came with it. We have the very old Smith & Wesson holster. We thankfully have the original instruction manual. So that's very, very nice. I always like to see an original there. And then another marketing piece here, a little cautionary statement and authorized distributor. So that was what was in this box. There could be a document missing in here. It probably did come originally with the rod and brush. Probably the 4-inch rod with brush was probably supplied with this firearm. So if I kind of wanted to complete this box, I'd have to add that, which I could, and I probably should, because I plan on keeping this firearm, and whoever inherits this or gets this will probably want that. But so that's our Model 59. I wanted to share that with you because, again, a great extension out of the Model 39. You can't really have the Model 59 unless you talk about the 39 and the 39-2. And again, another great historical connection back to the U.S. Navy SEALs, because again, this pistol wouldn't have potentially been designed if the SEALs hadn't asked for a double stack capacity, high capacity firearm. So I hope you guys like that. It's a very, very enjoyable gun to own. The first generation guns are very nice, very well built, very accurate, generally very reliable. They don't really have any Achilles heels or anything like that. They're generally regarded as very reliable firearms. I think if you're looking to add one to your collection, they're a great pickup. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and we'll see you again very, very soon on the Daily Defender.